There was a story I first heard during the time that I was received into the Catholic Church. And it's the story of a man telling a child to deliver a time-sensitive parcel for him. And to help him, he gave him a bicycle to help him deliver it. After a few days, the child came back without the parcel being delivered. And the man asked the child, "What happened?" And the child said, "Well, I would have made it in time if you hadn't given me this bicycle to carry on my back along with the parcel." Instead of seeing the bicycle as a means to aid him in his task, he saw it as an additional burden. In our path through life, do we see Christ and the Scriptures as an aid or as an additional burden in our lives? The Pharisees had 613 provisions of the law that they had to observe if they had any hope of salvation, ranging from what to eat when to literally how to put on your shoes and how to tie your shoelaces. In the gospel today, Christ is calling all of us who are overburdened to come to him, to find rest through him. And he does this by condensing all the laws that the Pharisees like to follow to the letter into just two: love of God and love of neighbor. In the second reading today in Paul's letter to the Romans, he said very clearly, "Your interests are not in the unspiritual, but the spiritual, since the Spirit of God has made his home in you." To come to Jesus and to find rest is to submit to his way of ordering things in our private, professional, family, and social lives. The gospel invites us today into this structure. First is the recipients of revelation. He calls them little children, not the learned, not the clever. What he's talking about here is the example of how children love, to serve, and to forgive. And it's hidden from those who want to control life by their means of human knowledge, instead of using that knowledge to the higher wisdom of love and generosity that God intended it. Jesus is not condemning learning, but he reminds us about who that knowledge should serve. While fishermen, tax collectors, and sinners were receiving Jesus and turning to him, the ones that were considered educated in his time were rejecting him and his message. To accept God's word, one must be open to receive it and to accept it with humility and the type of innocence that's found in a child. You wouldn't think this innocence would be found in a collection of fishermen, tax collectors, and sinners, but they responded to Jesus, repented, and followed him. And it shows us as proof that what we assume of a person's spiritual life can very often be wrong. Then Jesus goes and talks about the burdens. We all have our burdens. It's kind of like a sack filled with stones. Regrets, failures, bad decisions, betrayals, anger, disappointments, rejection, loss, they all weigh us down. Now, Jesus doesn't take our burdens away, but he does say, he says earlier that we have to accept our cross and follow him. But he does lighten the load. And he uses an interesting term here. It's called a yoke. A yoke, as many of you I'm sure knows, is a very large usually wooden, plank with a couple of holes for oxen to go through, and the oxen would push on that yoke. And thanks to that yoke, the oxen would be able to push much more than what a single oxen would be able to take. Jesus is that second oxen for us in our lives. He lightens our load, like the bicycle given to the child in the story. The child had the bicycle, but he saw it as a burden, not as an aid. So my question to you is, do you see Jesus as an aid in your life or as an additional burden?